conscious on the way to the hospital. He was conscious in the ambulance. He was conscious after they did the surgery.
For decades, Tupac Shakur's final hours have been clouded in mystery. Now, a nurse who stood by his side at the hospital has broken her silence, revealing what really happened in those haunting last moments. From his final words to a shocking secret he revealed at the end, I've got the details. Let's break it down. The real story of Tupac's final days. Yo, let me break this down for you real quick. September 7th, 1996 was supposed to be just another night of celebration for the realest cat to ever touch a microphone. Tupac Shakur, the 25-year-old king of the West Coast, had just witnessed Iron Mike Tyson demolish Bruce Seldon in under 2 minutes at the MGM Grand Garden Arena, and the whole Vegas Strip was buzzing with that victory energy. But see, when you're living that street life, even your moments of glory can turn deadly in the blink of an eye. Tupac Amaru Shakur was sitting pretty at ringside with Death Row Records CEO Marion Suge Knight, watching Tyson do what he does best, knock folks out cold. The fight was over so fast that cats in the crowd felt like they got robbed of their money. But for Pac and his crew, the night was just getting started. They had plans to roll up to Club 662, Suge's own spot, where Tupac was scheduled to bless the stage at a charity concert later that evening. But the streets had other plans, and when the streets call, ain't nobody safe. As they were moving through the MGM Grand Lobby at 8:49 p.m. PDT, one of Suge's soldiers, Trayvon Trey Lane, peeped Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a young cat from the rival Southside Compton Crips. Now, this wasn't just some random run-in between strangers. There was serious beef brewing in these streets. Earlier that year, Anderson and his Crip homies had tried to jack Lane at a Foot Locker, and in the hood, that kind of disrespect don't just disappear with time. What went down next set off a chain reaction that would end up taking one of hip-hop's greatest voices from us forever. According to multiple witnesses and that security footage that caught everything, Tupac stepped to Anderson directly, asking if he was from the South, that street code for the Southside Crips. Without even waiting for an answer, Tupac straight up punched Anderson, dropped him to the floor, and then him, Suge, and the whole Death Row crew proceeded to stomp this young Crip out. Now, anybody who really knew Pac could tell you this behavior was wild out of character for him. Kendrick Wells, somebody who was tight with the rapper, later spoke on how strange this whole situation felt.
In that situation, he was never the leader of violence, but that's where he was at. And I think that was different. That struck me odd that he was leading that. That shows that he was trying to show somebody he's with this. He's with you. Not he's in the gang, but he's with you.
See, Wells understood something that a lot of people missed. This wasn't really about Tupac being some hardcore gangster. This was about loyalty, about proving to his Death Row family that he was down for whatever.
We know he wasn't a gang member, but he was influenced by being the first to bomb, you know what I'm saying? When somebody came up to him and said, we got an issue, which they never should have did. Pac was $1 million nigga. Should have never let him nowhere near that. But the mentality was, if your homies fight, you fight, and everybody knows that.
The beatdown got broken up by hotel security, but the damage was already done. Orlando Anderson, bruised up and embarrassed in front of hundreds of people, got escorted away from the scene. But anybody who knows how the streets operate understood that this wasn't the end of nothing. In the world these young cats lived in, respect was everything, and getting disrespected this publicly, especially by somebody as high profile as Tupac, meant retaliation was coming. After the whole MGM situation, Tupac and the Death Row crew headed back to the Luxor Hotel where they were posted up. Pac switched from his orange silk shirt into a green basketball jersey and had what would turn out to be his last conversation with his fiancée, Kidada Jones. In a move that might have saved her life, he told her to stay at the hotel instead of rolling with them to Club 662. Looking back, you gotta wonder, was it intuition telling him something was off, or just coincidence that kept the woman he loved away from what was about to go down? At 10:50 p.m., Tupac and Suge Knight dipped from the Luxor in a black 1996 BMW 750 IL with Suge behind the wheel and Pac riding shotgun. They were rolling with a convoy of about 10 cars carrying Death Row personnel, including Tupac's bodyguard, Frank Alexander. This detail becomes crucial when you understand what happened next, because Frank Alexander would later reveal that he wasn't supposed to be in a separate whip that night.
I literally had my hand on the back door, opening the back door. And Pac stopped me and turned and said, "Hey, Frank, here's the keys to Kidada's car. You go drive with the Outlaws so you could be our designated driver and drive us back after we leave the club tonight, from drinking."
Alexander would later think about this moment with some serious chills, realizing how close he came to getting caught up in the crossfire. The convoy cruised through the neon-lit Vegas streets, and around 11:05 p.m., they got pulled over by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department bike patrol officers for bumping music too loud and for not having license plates visible. The music they were blasting was from Tupac Tupac's unreleased album, The Don Illuminati, The 7-Day Theory, tracks that the world wouldn't even hear until after he was gone. The cops didn't write them up though, and they got sent on their way. What makes this moment even more haunting is that a famous photograph, known as the last photo of Tupac, was snapped by Leonard Jefferson at a red light, showing Pac smiling in the passenger seat. In this picture, he looks relaxed, happy even, completely unaware that he had less than 10 minutes left on this earth. At exactly 11:15 p.m. PDT, while posted up at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane in front of the Maxim Hotel, Tupac was chopping it up with two females in a car next to them, inviting them to come through to Club 662. It was such a regular moment, a young cat macking on some shorties at a traffic light, making plans for the rest of the night. But then, a white late model Cadillac with 4 dudes inside pulled up on the right side of the BMW. Frank Alexander, who was in the car directly behind them, witnessed what went down next with crystal clear detail. A shooter in the back seat of the Cadillac rolled down the window and let loose at least 13 shots from a .40 caliber Glock 22. The bullets tore through the night air with deadly accuracy. Tupac caught 4 of them, twice in the chest, with one bullet puncturing his right lung, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. Suge got grazed in the head by bullet fragments or glass. In those terrifying seconds, Tupac tried to climb into the back seat to get away from the gunfire, but he got hit multiple times before he could escape the line of fire. The Cadillac then peeled out down Koval Lane, disappearing into the Vegas night, leaving behind a scene straight out of a nightmare. Despite having a flat tire and being wounded himself, Suge made a desperate U-turn and drove about a mile to Las Vegas Boulevard and Harmon Avenue, running red lights in his frantic attempt to get help. When the police stopped the car again, they found a scene that would stick with first responders for the rest of their lives. Former Las Vegas police officer Chris Carroll was the first cat on the scene, and he kept asking Tupac who had shot him. According to Carroll, Tupac's response was, "F you," which Carroll said were his final words before he lost consciousness. However, other cats who were there, including Suge and bodyguard Frank Alexander, didn't confirm hearing these words, leaving even Tupac's last conscious moments wrapped up in mystery and contradiction. As the paramedics rushed to the scene and got ready to transport Tupac to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, none of them could have imagined that they were about to witness one of the most dramatic and controversial hospital situations in music history. The young man bleeding in that BMW wasn't just another shooting victim, he was Tupac Shakur, and his fight for life was about to have the whole world watching. Fighting for life in the hospital. The University Medical Center of Southern Nevada had seen mad trauma cases roll through their emergency doors, but nothing could have prepared the medical staff for the intensity of the next 6 days. When Tupac Shakur got wheeled into their trauma bay on that September night, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds, they weren't just treating another victim of Vegas street violence, they were fighting to save one of the most powerful voices of our generation. Tupac went under the knife for emergency surgery lasting over 2 hours to handle his injuries, especially the internal bleeding caused by the chest wounds. The surgical team worked like their lives depended on it to stabilize him, while outside the hospital, word was already spreading through the hip-hop community like wildfire. Meanwhile, Suge Knight, with his minor injuries from bullet fragments or glass, got patched up and was released from the hospital on September 8th, leaving Tupac to fight the most important battle of his life all alone. The first sign that this wasn't going to be no typical recovery came early. Kendrick Wells, who had stayed connected with Tupac's inner circle, was getting updates that initially seemed promising. This initial hope wasn't just wishful thinking. According to Suge Knight, who was present during those early days, Tupac was conscious and even talking. In a 1996 MTV News interview conducted just 1 week after Tupac's death, Knight broke down details that painted a picture of a fighter who wasn't ready to tap out. Knight's account of their conversation during the ride to the hospital shows you the type of cat Tupac really was. Even while bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds, he was still looking out for others. Even more incredible, Knight described how Tupac was acting during those terrifying moments. But as the days passed, Tupac's condition got more and more critical. From September 9th through 12th, he had to go under the knife again to remove his punctured right lung to stop the internal bleeding. The medical team made the tough decision to put him in a medically induced coma after he kept trying to get out of bed, his fighting spirit working against his. Bodies need to heal. During these crucial days, the hospital turned into a pilgrimage spot for hip-hop royalty and street soldiers alike. Snoop Dogg, who had his own complicated relationship with Tupac due to the East Coast-West Coast beef.
Right after I heard Tupac got shot, and I was so weak I damn near fell over. I immediately flew to Vegas, and I walked in the room and I seen him laid out on the bed with all kind of tubes in him, and his mom came over to me and she grabbed me, she held me up and she said, "Baby, you got to be strong." And I went and sat next to him and was whispering to him, telling him I loved him and to hold on and he was gonna be okay. And even in that moment, his mom was thinking more about me than herself and showing me how to love strong.
Made an emotional trip to Vegas that he'd never forget. The scene outside Tupac's hospital room was like something straight out of a hood movie. Members of Tupac's group, Outlaws and other cats, were posted up guarding his hospital room around the clock, worried that the shooters might come back to finish the job. The paranoia wasn't unfounded. In the world they came from, leaving work unfinished was a sign of weakness, and everybody knew that Tupac had enemies who wouldn't hesitate to strike again. His fiancée, Kidada Jones, was constantly by his side and played Don McLean's Vincent on a CD player next to his bed. There were moments of hope during these vigil days, times when Tupac seemed to respond to familiar voices and music. According to Jones, Tupac moaned and woke up briefly, but his eyes were swollen and filled with mucus, making it unclear how much he was really aware of what was going on around him. The most heartbreaking part of this whole hospital drama was the false hope that came on what would be Tupac's last day. Kendrick Wells got a phone call that seemed to indicate a miraculous turnaround. This crushing moment, getting news of recovery only to immediately learn of death, captures the surreal and devastating nature of losing someone who seemed larger than life. Wells's reaction reflects what millions of fans around the world were feeling. The medical reality was way grimmer than what friends and family wanted to believe. On September 13, 1996, Tupac stopped breathing multiple times, and doctors managed to bring him back 3 times. Each resuscitation was a temporary victory in an increasingly hopeless battle. The young man who had survived poverty, police harassment, previous shootings, and prison was finally facing an opponent he couldn't beat through sheer willpower. The decision about when to stop fighting fell to the one person who knew Tupac better than anyone, his mother, Afeni Shakur. The former Black Panther made the agonizing choice to stop medical treatment, feeling it was important for Tupac's spirit to be free. This wasn't a decision made lightly by a grieving mother. It was the choice of a woman who understood that sometimes love means letting go. At 4:03 p.m. PDT on September 13, 1996, Tupac Amaru Shakur was pronounced dead due to respiratory failure and cardiopulmonary arrest caused by his gunshot wounds. He was 25 years old, but the story don't end with his death. In fact, some of the most controversial and disputed aspects of Tupac's final days would come out years later, as various people began sharing their versions of what really went down in that hospital room. As news of Tupac's death spread across the globe, the immediate response was one of disbelief and devastation. The impact on those closest to him was profound and lasting, as Kendrick Wells would later describe. The conflicting accounts, mysterious decisions, and unanswered questions would fuel conspiracy theories and debates that continue to this day. Conspiracy, betrayal, and the search for truth. An autopsy was performed on the evening of September 13th, and Tupac's body was cremated later that same night at Davis Mortuary. The speed of this cremation would later fuel countless conspiracy theories from the streets to the suburbs. According to Suge Knight, Afeni Shakur insisted on immediate cremation, though Knight recalled Tupac wanting a wake. This discrepancy between what Tupac allegedly wanted and what actually happened would become just one of many mysteries surrounding his final hours. Perhaps most controversially, some of Tupac's homies reportedly honored him by rolling his ashes into a blunt and smoking it, though Knight, who was on probation, didn't participate. This detail, whether true or not, speaks to the unconventional and deeply personal ways that Tupac's inner circle chose to say goodbye to their fallen soldier. But it's the competing narratives about what really went down in those final days that have kept investigators, journalists, and the streets searching for answers for decades. In a shocking 2025 interview with People magazine, Suge Knight made explosive claims that contradicted much of what had been previously reported. Knight alleged that Tupac had asked him to kill me to avoid imprisonment for the earlier brawl with Orlando Anderson, believing that suicide would prevent him from going to heaven, and that Knight refused this request. Even more disturbing, Knight claimed that Afeni Shakur gave Tupac pills to ease his suffering and instructed doctors not to revive him again if he stopped breathing, saying, "Let him go." These claims are controversial and unverified by other sources, and they directly contradict the narrative of a mother fighting to save her son's life. The investigation into Tupac's murder faced enormous challenges from the very beginning. The case suffered from a lack of cooperation from witnesses, including Knight and the death row entourage. Sergeant Kevin Manning, who led the investigation, noted in 1997 that the case may never be solved because witnesses clammed up. This code of silence wasn't just about street credibility. It reflected a deep distrust of law enforcement that runs through the hood like blood through veins. A member of Tupac's entourage who witnessed the shooting was killed before being interviewed, and police failed to follow up on leads, such as a white Cadillac spotted by a witness. These investigative failures would haunt the case for decades, leaving crucial evidence uncollected and key testimonies unheard. The primary suspect emerged quickly from the streets. Orlando Anderson, the Crip member who had been stomped out by Tupac earlier that night, was widely considered the prime suspect. The logic was simple and street smart. Public disrespect demanded public retaliation. A 2002 Los Angeles Times investigation by Chuck Phillips alleged that the shooting was retaliation by the Southside Crips for Anderson's beating, with Anderson firing the fatal shots. However, Anderson was never formally charged, and he was killed in an unrelated gang shootout in May 1998, taking whatever secrets he may have held to his grave. Afeni Shakur filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Anderson in 1997, citing an affidavit that he was seen with a .40 caliber Glock shortly after the shooting, but legal justice would remain elusive for the streets. The case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved until September 29, 2023, when Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, Anderson's uncle and a Southside Crips OG, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with a gang. Enhancement. Davis had spent years publicly confessing to his role in the murder through interviews and his 2018 memoir, Compton Street Legend, apparently believing that a decades-old immunity agreement protected him from prosecution. Davis admitted to being in the front passenger seat of the Cadillac during the shooting, with Anderson and DeAndre Smith, both now deceased, in the back. While Davis claimed Anderson was the actual shooter, he refused to name the trigger man due to the code of the streets. Under Nevada law, aiding or conspiring in a murder allows for murder charges, even if the individual didn't pull the trigger. But Davis's arrest opened up even more controversial territory that had the streets talking. In his various interviews and confessions, Davis alleged that Sean Diddy Combs, head of Bad Boy Records, had offered $1 million for Tupac's murder due to the East Coast-West Coast rivalry. These allegations, which Combs has denied, added a layer of industry conspiracy to what many had seen as a straightforward case of street retaliation. The conflicting narratives become even more complex when examining the accounts of those who were closest to the scene. Suge Knight, the only living witness to the actual shooting, has provided multiple versions of events over the years, sometimes contradicting his own previous statements. When asked about Davis's arrest and whether he would testify, Knight's response was telling. This creates a wild contradiction. Knight explicitly states that Orlando Anderson wasn't the shooter, yet refuses to identify who was. He also made clear his position on snitching. The most disturbing aspect of all these revelations might be how they've turned Tupac's death into a commodity for people to profit off of. Kendrick Wells expressed this frustration when discussing the media coverage and how it disrespected Pac's legacy. Davis's trial is scheduled for February 2026, and it may finally provide some answers to questions that have haunted the hood for nearly 3 decades. However, the trial also faces significant challenges. Most of the key witnesses are dead, and much of the evidence relies on Davis's own confessions, which have varied over time. But the streets never forget, and the conspiracy theories keep getting deeper. Gene Deal, who was Diddy's bodyguard back in the day, has been dropping some serious knowledge about how the feds could potentially link Diddy to Pac's murder. He broke down how they saw a check that Eric Zip Martin had for $1 million, allegedly from Blackground Records, and how nobody in authority has ever denied that this check existed. The wild part is how all these cats, who were supposed to be investigating, never really ran down whether Eric Von Zip Martin ever cashed a check for $1 million from Blackground Records. Deal pointed out that they could easily check Blackground Records accounts to see if they wrote a check for that amount, but it seems like nobody with the power to investigate really wanted to dig that deep. When it comes to the current situation with Keefe D's case, Tupac's father, Billy Garland, had some real talk about how he sees the whole situation. He thinks Keefe D is basically a snitch who would tell the slave master where the slaves was hiding, and that he's just the type of cat who has no principles. Garland sees Keefe D as someone the government used and is now using in return, a perfect example of how the system manipulates people from the hood to close cases. The streets are still talking about how this whole case has been handled, and there's a growing feeling that justice might never really be served, not the kind of justice that Tupac deserved anyway. Too many key players are dead, too many stories have changed over the years, and too many people with power have benefited from keeping the truth buried. Frank Alexander, who was right there when it all went down, summed up the reality of what we're dealing with when he talked about how anyone could walk into a police station right now and confess to killing Tupac or Biggie, but they couldn't be arrested because there's been too much exposure, too many theories, and too many stories out there. The case has been so contaminated by all the different narratives that even a real confession might not hold up in court. The hood lost more than just an artist that day. We lost a leader, a voice for change, and someone who could have bridged the gap between the streets and the system. As we wait to see what happens with Keefe D's trial, we're reminded that sometimes the most important truths aren't found in courtrooms, but in the hearts and memories of those who knew what Tupac really represented. Like this video? Click on the card showing on your screen for more.